podcast excellence since 2005. This is the King of Podcasts radio network, kingofpodcasts.com.
Are PBS and NPR said to be crucified by the FCC?
The King of Podcasts radio network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast. Here is the King of Podcasts.
So we're now finally at the moment where the FCC is undergoing a change in several commissioners on the board. Brendan Carr is now the newly appointed commissioner of the FCC, replacing Jessica Rosen-Worcel. And one of the first acts that are going to be looked at right now that is being reported is an investigation on public broadcasting, namely the Public Broadcasting Service and National Public Radio. Now, I'm not surprised that this move is going to be happening next, if they're going to decide to go and do this in the first place, because of the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. Without going into political things, yes, there are thoughts that National Public Radio and PBS, they have quite a bit of money that's being spent by them and budgeted to them every year. And there's a reevaluation if that's going to help serve the public interest. Listen, for a government agency, they're looking for objectivity. They're looking for correct and proper information, which it doesn't matter what anybody says. Look, if there's something here where a new administration wants to come in and they feel like they want to come in and do something here, I think there's something that might be predetermined here that I've always said about, at least for NPR. I will always say that NPR, as a broadcaster, in terms of their presentation of their programming, their attention to detail, their broadcast quality is second to none. I will always say that NPR does an amazing job. Maybe the content is suspect for some, and that's what we're going to be looking at. That's obviously what the FCC is going to be looking at, is they're going to investigate and go granular and detail into and magnify the content they've been doing over the last period of years. That's what they want to go and look at. Now, but I will always say that NPR as an entity, they were always one of the first major mainstream outlets to embrace podcasting. I think it was 2014 that Serial came out. Halfway into the pioneering of podcasting, of which I started early on back in 2005. And when I heard that NPR was going to be into it, I was like, yeah, that would work. I mean, talk programming or any kind of biography programming would work. And so they came into the space and they chose to go and do this and put new podcasts out there and also repurpose their own content. As a result, NPR still holds up as having some of the most popular podcasts in all of podcasting worldwide. So good on them. That's a good thing for them. And I think they're able to get underwrite messages. They're getting funds for it. And I think that's what's actually really helping out their own content, because they're under no issues of the guidelines when it comes to broadcasting or FCC control. That's the one thing you got to think about as well, is that will the FCC overstretch what their thoughts are about what their podcasting efforts are if the broadcasts will continue? And I've always said, in the last 4 or 5 years I've been doing this program, I always thought it would be a good idea to go and have the FCC not necessarily going to intervene on this, but like if they're going to do something about it, if there's a decision to pull or decrease or defund NPR and PBS altogether. For me, NPR as an entity, I always thought it could exist as a self-serving podcast service. Because I don't think at all that we should see NPR go by the wayside in their podcasting service. I don't at all. There's obviously an audience for that. There's obviously, people should go ahead and have that content because it's very popular. It is listened to. That's okay. But I will agree with the FCC that when you have this kind of content, and this also goes into political end as well, let's just say it like that. I wish we had it where NPR could have a more balanced approach to their content. I don't know if it's ever been that way or not, but it's obvious that we see what other countries do with their content and what they're able to go and do. BBC is such a great example. CBC also a pretty good example, but BBC has always been a great example of what they're able to go and do with what they do with their programming. I mean, BBC, for the most part, they are much about programming for music, entertainment, sport, and the like, but they also, of course, do talk programming. Of course, they do other programming, but they're very good at that. PBS, I mean, for ages and ages, the real thing that PBS had that was exceptional for them was their children's programming. There's no question. Children's Television Workshop. Programming they got out of WGBH Boston or out of Pittsburgh or out of, New York, whatever. It's like they just had, or Pittsburgh, right? You think of the shows that were created by PBS that, growing up as a kid, I watched Mr. Rogers. I watched Electric Company. I watched 3-2-1 Contact. They were great shows. They were good. We were blessed with good children's programming. And Sesame Street was never something I watched, but I know it was very popular. And, I thought it was kind of sad to go and see Sesame Street go by the way of PBS and go over to HBO to continue on. And I think that was one of the areas where PBS really thrived. Now, there's still things you could say about Morning Edition or All Things Considered or Marketplace or all these other shows. By the way, other shows that are also produced that are not by NPR, but National Public Media and PRI, Public Radio International. Like, there's other things like that. And also, they also provide the BBC World Service. Like, there's things they put out there that are important. I think in some cases, the NPR stations that do their news broadcasts, they're not that bad either. And I wish they had more local news programming on there, but they don't. Because NPR doesn't also really go that far into public affairs. Meanwhile, I hate the rules that have always been out there for commercial radio stations that must provide 3 hours a month of public affairs programming. And I think they never did a good job of that. But I don't know if it's necessarily a requirement of that. Because my real issue is more with commercial radio stations and how the FCC has taken a seat and has never enacted or even considered the idea of reversing deregulation. And even the thoughts that Brendan Carr has right now to go ahead and continue deregulation and to expand on it, I hate it. I understand for some people, for commercial radio stations, for companies all out there, yeah, you want to just continue to allow the consolidation? I don't. But it's also in the matter of, like, how many other buyers are out there anymore? Because some of these entities are so big, like you're going to see the Paramount Skydance merger. Those companies, you got to be pretty big companies to go and even enact. First of all, for the company that's going to be bought, and for a company that's going to sell it or going to buy it. It's a lot of that. And so my first point that I want to make that was more important than anything was this thought about the argument of that I'd like to go and put across at the start of the show, that the FCC, if they would listen to this lowly podcaster right here that cares about radio so much, I would ask for this. And I got this written down. I'm going to take this here, and I took a little bit of time to go and just make this point. I'm going to read this for you. The recent FCC announcement probing the funding mechanisms for NPR and PBS while signaling increased scrutiny for media giants presents a pivotal moment to re-examine the very foundation of our media landscape. Now, remember, it's not anything about FCC is going to just touch linear, right? They're going to touch linear and digital transmissions, nothing online. We don't need the FCC to go ahead and deal with that. They're going to deal with broadband, but the content that's on there, no, they're not going to touch it. I don't think it will. Again, net neutrality is not an issue here. I don't know if that gets revisited either, but that's another story for another day. This is not merely about funding models. It's about the soul of our information ecosystem and the health of our democracy for a free press. And not this whole idea everybody else is talking about. Let's just get that out of the way too. This is what I mean about democracy in this end. For the business sector, decades of deregulation have eroded the core principles that once ensured a diverse, informative, and accountable media. If you really want to talk about the issues of having the news media be objective, yeah, we need more voices, not less. Why are we always trying to go ahead and go after these big letter corporate news agencies, trying to get them to go ahead and change or go objective just because of who they are? No. What needs to happen is we need to have more competitive news outlets and let the public market determine what they want, because that's the best way to do it. Now, the reason why NPR does so on podcasting as well is because it's free. They might have supporting and sponsors and underwriters and all, but still, you can access their content for free. It's not behind a paywall, not like some other places. And they also can listen to it whenever they want on demand. That's what they want. It's much easier to go there than go find an FM dial under 92 on the FM dial and go look for a station. Because how many times do you also have NPR stations that are not synchronized with the rest of the market? Big market stations will have all the talk programming together. Others will just have classical music. Others will just have something else on because of their choice. So it's a little bit inconsistent as well as to which shows are being picked up by NPR affiliate stations or NPR member stations or not. So this is where I'm coming from with this. The media landscape can be fixed if you have more competition with smaller owners, with more owners, not competition among the biggest owners and the ones that are survival of the fittest. I mean, sure, there's already those companies right now, but we don't need to go and have where some of these companies, especially when it comes to affiliates, okay, ownership of individual stations in markets. You want to have a large swath of your content being around? That's one thing. But I also don't want to have them owning stations all over the place. No, get your content made available to these outlets and they can determine it, like it used to be. So there's a lot of choices out there. Because what online gives us is choice. So let's get the traditional media back to choice. You're never going to fix news. In terms of journalism, newspapers, publishers, that's not going to happen. AI is going to take that over. It's already started. But you can actually control what's going on with radio and television right now. FCC, you can do something about this and make a change right now. The consequences are starkly evident. Consolidation. This is going back to 1980. When we talked about the FCC chair at that time. And then you fast forward to 1996 and the Telecommunications Act that President Clinton signed into law that aggressively fostered consolidation at a much more rapid pace than we ever saw. Keep this in mind too. So David Feld, the CEO of Odyssey, he's stepping down. You know, his father, I think it was Joe Feld, right? He's the guy that actually bought all those stations for Odyssey, or actually it was Entercom and whatever it was, the Entercom stations, then getting CBS, then getting Infinity Broadcasting, getting all those stations together. And then his son takes over, David, and he's a lush. He poorly mismanages his company. Now it's in full debt. Lowry Mays, same thing with Clear Channel. Then they let his sons control this, and they screw it up. Now, maybe they're also inheriting the fact that they took on all these stations, and then they also accrued so much debt as a result when you have all these mergers coming in, because of how much debt is being accrued from the sales of these stations, because then these companies are going to be bought, and they'll take the debt on. And then you have things like where Odyssey wants to have Soros Fund Management that helps them out on their debt because they need somebody else to go ahead and take some of the ownership off their hands because they can't afford it. They can't hold on to this sinking company. Like these radio companies that are like the Titanic. And I'm honestly, seriously befuddled on the fact that, okay, so yeah, you can find biters. Liberty Media trying to get into it, right? With iHeartMedia or SiriusXM. But then the other end is that you have Soros Fund Management or other companies that want to go ahead and buy into Odyssey. And it goes along. Not to mention the private equity groups and their involvement. Homogenization of content is another big issue, because then if you let other stations operate without all this bulk ownership, you would actually have different content. I really believe that. If you got the opportunity to do this, we would have more original, organic content, because there will not be these owners that will go ahead and all decide, oh, we're just going to pick up some other syndicated programming or some other affiliated programming and just fill our airways and make money off of that. No, they'll actually try to go ahead and build programming. They might take some from some others, but they'll actually try to build some local programming, something that will be different. Just saying. Or do a better job at doing something else. Like if it's a music radio station, let some of these other people know what they're doing. And do not follow the rules of like what all these other companies that are out there, oh, this is the way the charts are, this is the way the record labels are. No, we can have some people that are actually autonomous. Enterprise. I want more enterprise thinking and setup for radio and television. Not just monopolies. Not just monopolies. There are already some that are out there. But we need to have some grassroots coming out of the word work to compete against these. And I believe it can happen. The relentless pursuit of profit has incentivized sensationalism and clickbait, undermining the very notion of journalistic integrity. But that's the part of when you homogenize the content. And when your homogenized content doesn't work, then you have to go ahead and start gimmicks. You have to start doing things that are not above board. So, echo chambers, partisan divides. You want to anger, make someone upset, get pissed off, make them cry, make them emotional, make them scared. What do you think that these big, large corporate outlets were doing when we were in here in the COVID, right? They didn't watch your channels, folks. That's why online got even more expansive. That's why you have more people just doing more content creation than ever. And that's why the broadcast quality got better. People just had time in hibernation to learn how to do it better. And to have content as such a quality right now that as long as you can put it on a TV, people don't even care. Like, if you can find a way to watch other stuff on TV and it's great quality, great. Because people are not accustomed to the fact that you need to watch something on HD on a television or listen to it on a radio. Nobody's doing that. With your smart TVs, you can find an app that'll play whatever you want. Aside from the streaming, there's a lot of people that can go and use YouTube or whatever else they want to watch, something else on, and they're fine with that. They're content. So reversing this tide requires a bold assertion of regulatory power. Reinstating ownership limits. Yes, no more 8 FMs, AMs for any particular company in any particular market. Let's be clear about that. We know that's only devised for allowing the largest companies to benefit. Because we know the larger companies can go ahead and buy all those stations up. For television and radio, limit it. You want to go back to 2 and 2 or 4 and 4? 4 AMs, 4 FMs? What? 2 UHFs, 2 VHFs? Yeah, go right ahead. Let's cut it down. Let's let some other people come in here and own stations. That's a great idea. Now, in this thing that I also put together, we can do something where the resources for public broadcasting should be directed more towards their on-demand content. Like, okay, they don't need a big budget operating all these towers. The towers, the FM signals that they're getting, because remember, there's no AM NPR stations. I don't believe so. Mostly FM. I think all of them. Give those FM transmitters and frequencies back to local owners. Let them take it. Imagine what local, ethnic, whatever kind of programming you have, if you gave those frequencies back to the people and people could go and buy off of those. Oh man, that would be great. Get rid of some antiquated laws as to what stations could be on a particular part of the dial. Let's get rid of that rule too. Whatever you want between 88 and 92, great. Does it have to be non-commercial? No, I don't think so. And you make those non-commercial signals commercial. You do that. It's time to reclaim the airways as a public trust, ensuring that our media serves not just the bottom line, but the very foundation of our democratic society. Now, one other thing that could be said about this as well, if I'm making this argument, Some people will say, well, what about the fairness doctrine? All right. Fostering a media environment where diverse viewpoints are not just tolerated but actively encouraged. No. Again, that is public consumption. Those stations should determine what they're going to do with their content based on audience response. Because how many people do we have now that want to watch programming where we have political fairness? There isn't. There's no real political fairness right now. And anybody trying to do that, I'm sorry, Crossfire is not on the air anymore. And there are no shows and no networks right now that are even giving us that kind of fairness. They're not. I don't care what anybody says. It's not going to happen. And nobody wants it. Because now we're already accustomed to the fact that people having their own echo chambers, partisan divide, that's just the way it is. But there can be multiple outlets out there open to go and have whatever kind of voice they want to have. That's fine. That's okay too. So I want to take from some stories that were out there. First of all, the FCC and what they're going to be doing. Let's go into this right now. The LA Times was one of the first people to go and start talking about this, and this was last week. So Brendan Carr is the new chair of the Federal Communications Commission. And he is reviving complaints now that allege liberal media bias. This is from the LA Times, by the way. Carr talked about the fact that there are complaints now that have been filed against the top three networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. Look, we already know that right now there's some litigious type environment right now. There's a litigious environment right now among people now because of the election change, and now that we have a newly installed president who is president once again, there are a lot of court cases coming around, and you're seeing a lot of lawsuits against some of these companies. CNN, ABC, they're all getting lawsuits hit on a regular basis. Fox News as well. They're all hitting it. And that's going to be something that's going to be much more common. And you know what? For the fact that all these companies can be sued upon, yeah, it's fine. You know, if they're making issues, yeah, take it to court. The thing is, no one wants to disclaim. No one wants to retract. Nobody wants to do that anymore. There's some kind of onus, the fact that, oh, if we made a mistake, we can't really say anything about it. We have to kind of just like sleep it under the rug. But now, because of this, some people that realize the kind of power that the media has, if they decide to go and smear somebody and bring somebody to a point of criminal or civil outcry, and it kind of destroys their livelihood, their career, their financial situation, and everything like that. If these people feel like they want to go back and they can find a law firm that will go ahead and take their case, they're going to get it. But the other thing, too, is that these lawsuits really don't do too much, because you can see where companies might get $50 million, $100 million here and there, whatever. That's still chump change to some of these companies for what they have. But we're also seeing the change that some of these companies are also getting rid of their cable outlets. They're also spinning off their cable companies, their cable channels, because of the toxicity of those channels right now, and the fact that they need to go and do something because they're losing money with all this divisive content, no matter what it is. Brendan Carr is a 46-year-old lawyer from Washington, D.C. He's been serving on the commission since 2017. He dismantled the FCC's diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, signed an order eliminating the promotion of inclusion from the FCC strategic plan, and stripping money for diversity programs from the agency's budget. We already know that's been going on. That's in politics right now. That's what their whole deal is. That's the first thing they did. The next thing they're worrying about is the fact that what will happen to CBS and its parent company, Paramount Global, where President Trump filed a $10 billion lawsuit in Texas against CBS and already won a case from ABC News because of comments being made on their programming. Now, the other thing we're talking about when it comes to Paramount is they're seeking federal approval for this proposed $8 billion takeover by Skydance Media. And analysts expect the FCC complaint to pose a speed bump for Paramount and Skydance as the two firms push to finalize the merger this spring. Wall Street Journal reported that Paramount executives were considering settling the case to facilitate the merger. I want to take from another article that came from Radio World. Well, actually, we'll go into the other part. There's thehill.com that also talks about this. We'll take this part as well. But again, it's the same thing that's going on. Is the NPR and PBS, they're launching an investigation that they are airing commercials. This is something that's really surprising because of the fact that, they're allowed to underwrite. Very specifically about that, the rules allowed by that. And they might have been able to skate under some of this. Now, Brendan Carr wrote to news outlets in a letter obtained by the New York Times, quote, in particular, it is possible that NPR and PBS member stations are broadcasting underwriting announcements that cross the line into prohibited commercial announcements. NPR's president and CEO Katherine Maher said the outlet's programming and underwriting messaging complies with federal regulations, including the FCC guidelines on underwriting messages for non-commercial educational broadcasters, and member stations are expected to be in compliance as well. Quote, we are confident any review of our programming and our underwriting practices will confirm NPR's adherence to these rules, Maher said. We've worked for decades with the FCC in support of non-commercial educational broadcasters who provide essential information, yada, yada, yada. So we'll find out what's going to happen with that. But that's the onus right now as to where it's the first move right now of the FCC enacting on public broadcasting. Now, the Hill reports here that most of NPR's funding comes from private sponsorships and personal contributions from audience members, though it does receive a smaller portion of its money from the federal government and member stations. Now, I don't know about the PBS stations. The television stations might be a different story. But NPR does get funding from the government. There is a significant amount. Now, according to what they say here, National Public Radio receives 1% of its total annual budget from direct federal funding, but when accounting for indirect federal support through grants from local member stations to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the government funding is actually more 10% of NPR's budget. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting receives about $525 million annually from the federal government. Local member NPR stations rely on CPB grants as part of their funding for these stations, termed NPR for programming and membership fees. NPR's budget fluctuates and operates between $300 to $350 million per year, meaning federal support is roughly $30 to $35 million annually for its funding. Okay, so then the area that you would look at that would be looked at for what happens to these stations is the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. If you have them no longer fund, if the federal government does not fund the CBP or they close that down, again, NPR could still operate on a budget that's still under $300 million a year, but then also they decide to go and focus and to give a little more onus to allow them to have commercial advertising. That would be a different story. If they were allowed to go and have commercial advertising to supplement, I can see where they could go to that. Now, on the radio end, I want to talk about like this. Radio World put out an article about this, and the thinking among the radio community right now is the radio industry is that Brendan Carr, as head of the FCC, could usher in an era of deregulation, modernization, and rethinking of long-standing policies. Now, he's been a strong advocate of deregulation anyway. His confirmation now is expected to redefine the FCC's approach to broadcast radio, media ownership, emergency alerting, and cybersecurity. He's one of the leading voices in the push for greater flexibility in local broadcast regulations, and Carr and his agenda could bring both opportunities and challenges for stakeholders across the industry. From efforts to revitalize AM radio to revisiting the rules around media ownership and broadcast content, he will have a lasting impact. So here's what's looked at right now. More deregulation. What will that look like? He says he appears sensitive to the competitiveness of local broadcasters as they face increasing competition from digital media. The FCC is likely to prioritize using ownership restrictions and ensuring that broadcast regulations align with the rapidly evolving media landscape. AM stations. We've heard a lot about that and, trying to keep them in cars and dashboards and stuff like that. Well, they are struggling with declining audience revenue, and Carr's indicating strong support for initiatives like the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act, which is a new law that might be being put into a vote at some point. And his leadership could lead to policies that ease market consolidation, which might allow companies to own more stations in local markets. We don't want that. We don't want that. Potentially helping AM stations survive by sharing resources with other facilities. So when you allowed that, look at all the stations. I mean, right now where I'm at in West Palm Beach, the cluster that I worked for, that is iHeartRadio. or iHeartMedia. They have 7 stations there. They have 2 AM stations. All right. They're conservative talk programming on WJNO, which runs the normal Premier Radio Network's gamut of programming there. Okay. With little to no local programming except for the morning show. WBZT, which is now running their gambling-based programming there. And they've tried to do other things. They were just mostly brokered radio for years after WJNO took their programming away, as they were brought in from American Radio Systems and brought into the fold. Years ago. Anyways. And then, because WJNO before, years ago, was more local content. And then WBCT was more syndicated content, was doing much better. And then the switch was happening in deregulation and all the changes that were going on. And they decided, well, they did try to go with some other programming on WBCT, but then they dropped it. And in favor, they just said, well, we're going to just put something else to fill the space. And they tried a couple of things. They did try sports programming there. Now they just have the sports gambling network that they have. Because there's not much else they could do. They just have something that'll just fit in. But if these stations are going to go and operate as something else, remember, sharing resources with other facilities. So you're just going to put a server for that station in the same building, and they're just going to homogenize and put some other programming, something syndicated, something easy you can put on, or just have somebody else like operate another station, and just, if you want to voice of it over or not, you can do that too. Not to mention some of these stations also having to go and operate on their multiple HD signals, other programming that's just syndicated, just fodder, homogenized crap. His impact on FM radio may be less transformative in terms of regulation. His focus on deregulation could open the door for FM stations to consolidate or explore new business models. They also talk about the emergency alert system and what he might change with that as well in his approach. But the thing is, I don't want deregulation. That's the part that really is the biggest thing here. It's more of a business thinking. Instead of thinking for the radio broadcasters out there, then it's just something, it's just another property of media that these people that are owners that don't know anything to do with radio are just going to come into, bring on board, and do very little with. So it doesn't help the industry overall. Like these deregulating all these stations and consolidating them, you're just going to cut more jobs, which goes against what's going on. And don't get me wrong, listen, there's a lot of people right now that are broadcasting online. And I'll just say this too. There are quite a few people that could very well be good for radio if you wanted to try them out. And they're trying a couple of people out. Like in some of the bigger networks, they're going to try to use somebody that has already been out there, and they're trying to use their podcast prowess to see if they can work well in broadcasting. And you can definitely make that transition. But there are some people I think that if you give them a chance to go and do something more on radio, you can. But they're not. They're not being allowed to, which sucks. I want to take from another story from the Wrap.com that gave more context as to what was going on with the investigation on the commercials. Here's more of what the New York Times found in the letter. That NPR and PBS may be in violation of government rules acknowledging major donors on air, that these announcements they would have say the fact that Viking River Cruises underwrites portions of Downton Abbey on PBS may cross the line into prohibited commercial announcements or further undermine any case for continuing to fund NPR and PBS with taxpayer dollars. But I think the one thing that's going to go on here when it comes to what companies are going to do, here's the thing I got also get a tick from as well. Reason.com actually put a story out about the SEC chief. When it comes to mergers and acquisitions, because of the fact that Paramount agreeing to Skydance's terms and that merger being pushed across, this merger will be upcoming, according to the Associated Press. They said it would provide Paramount a legacy studio that has struggled to adapt to a shifting entertainment landscape with desperately needed cash. Mergers of that size bring considerable scrutiny from federal agencies. Well, I wish mergers of any size or consolidation of any big company would be scrutinized. The Federal Trade Commission, the FCC, has broad authority to review mergers and acquisitions by certain private companies, in part to prevent unfair methods of competition. The Department of Justice Antitrust Division also enforces antitrust law in sectors the FCC doesn't, like the telecom industry. Rounding out is the FCC, sharing authority with the DOJ to review telecom mergers and acquisitions. But while the DOJ reviews deals with the lens of competition, FCC examines whether the public interest, convenience, and necessity would be served by approving the merger. Didn't know really all that about that there. But like, okay, if the FCC has this look of the public interest, I would love to go and see where Brendan Carr actually communicates and works alongside the FTC and the Department of Justice Antitrust Division to go after these big radio companies. I would love for that to happen. That's a personal ask from me. I would love to see that. It's time to break some of these people up. It would be great to go and see that. Now, of course, all these stories in the media here, they all want to talk about the fact that all the content was out there politically during their election and before that, and that's the part I don't care about. I'm also taking from political websites because they're talking about it, but why not? Now, getting into the funding issue, Brendan Carr actually shared a letter with members of Congress when they were debating tax-based funding for NPR and PBS programming. Quote, "For my own part, I don't see a reason why Congress should continue sending taxpayer dollars to NPR and PBS given the changes in the media marketplace since the passage of the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967. Again, it would be looking into the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. That's what they're going to look at first of all. So, again, 10% roughly of the budget for NPR and PBS being taken out. It's not enough to go ahead and completely take out. But I think what they could do, I don't know what you do with PBS. I'm not sure. I mean, there is a purpose for it. I think if the FCC decides to go in further enforcement of what they're doing, I can understand that. I don't know if they've, been grossly mishandling content on that channel. I don't think so. But I think if you want to do something more with NPR, I would love to go and see more of these airways being given privately for private consumption, for private ownership. So let the towers, let the frequencies of the NPR stations go by the wayside. Let's give access to more local owners to those frequencies to counteract. Okay, if you're not going to reverse deregulation, then go ahead and defund if you want to do that. Let NPR be more of a podcast entity, right? And take those FM signals and let other people come by them. Overall, I think it will be a wonderful setup altogether. That's what I want more than anything. And this is the part where, to be honest, I think, the bigger media probably lobbies and funds the policymakers and people in these agencies to also be part of that, which is also a problem. Like, who's going to police them? Who's going to police the FCC when they're doing this? FreePress.net actually puts out a story about this, and they make the point about, this is from Free Press co-CEO Craig Aaron. I'll take some of this and kind of put into the point here. Carr may not like public media, but that's so surprising given he's isn't a fan of journalism that holds public officials and billionaires accountable. And this, as in so many other areas under his purview, Chairman Carr is far out of the step with the American public and their needs. Communities all across the country rely on their local public radio and TV stations to provide trustworthy news reporting and diversity opinions, and every survey of the American public indicates it wants more support for public and community media, not less. In a healthy democracy, we will be investing enough in our public media system that I wouldn't need to work to seek any corporate underwriting. I don't care for what he said right there. Listen, I don't know letting the government go ahead and be a media entity like it is right now and what they're also providing. I don't think that's something I need to worry about that. I just think that the public should have their own choice of that. And it's not like the defunding is not going to go ahead and significantly hamper these TV and radio stations under the Corporation of the Public Broadcasting model. They're going to hamper not that much. Again, a 10% cut is not going to hurt that much. Not as much as you would really think. Because it's still something where they can still do underwriting. Again, they can take in money, and they do. They take in membership funds. If that continues to be a crowdfunded kind of effort, then fine. Let it keep going. And I think if that 10% went away, I think there would be enough donor money coming in, however they're getting from grants and this and that, that will still be able to go ahead and support and sustain these stations. So non-for-profit, fine, you can still have that. But the other part he does say here is that the cronies in Congress and the big media barons that they are serving have instead for decades tried to zero out the funding for public media. No, what they've done is they've continued to go ahead and allow private companies, big corporations, to go and just take up media. They shouldn't do that. And so, Craig Aaron, I would rephrase that comment. The failure for millions of viewers and listeners is not because of the funding for public media. It's what they've done to private media and allowed it to go ahead and be consolidated to such a point where there's no competition. And if there is, it's not anything close to what it is. It's like, that's not real competition. It's contrived. Among 3-4 different companies? No, we don't want that. No. To control everything? No. So I talked about David Field out at Odyssey. Now they have a new interim CEO. Couple stories that really got my interest. One about OpenAI. Of course, we always follow about that. The media in India, one of the largest countries in the world, 1 billion people. Now ChatGPT now is coming to the news sector, and leading news publishers in India are escalating the case about concerns over the unauthorized use of their copyrighted content. So ChatGPT now is intensifying as digital news outlets owned by billionaires Gautam Adani and Mukesh Ambani are in an ongoing lawsuit against ChatGPT's creator, along with other largest news publishers in India, including the Indian Express, the Hindustan Times, and other Digital News Publishers Association members. That includes Z News, India Today, and The Hindu. These publishers claim that OpenAI scraped and adapted their copyrighted content without permission, hurting the industry's media revenue and intellectual property, reported Reuters. So the filings in the Delhi High Court argued that OpenAI's actions pose a clear and present danger to the valuable copyrights of these publishers. Hey, they're just going into your market because it was going to happen anyway. No plan for that. And this is, of course, after lawsuits globally, including one by the New York Times, highlighting a growing backlash from publishers against generative AI models. Well, again, another area of publishers not ready for what was going to happen here. Not ready. So there's a lot of thoughts about how this can really go against ChatGPT right now because of the size and scope of the media houses that are being added into this lawsuit, which accused OpenAI of using its content without authorization to train ChatGPT and spreading misinformation by attributing fabricated stories. And ChatGPT and their makers said they deleted the copyrighted content used to train the language learning model. OpenAI, however, has opposed the demand, saying it violates U.S. laws. There's a hearing set for this now. And they close out the story here and say that the outcome of the case could redefine the balance between innovation and AI and the rights of content creators, making India a critical battlefield in the global AI copyright debate, with Indian publishers and global precedents shaping the debate. OpenAI's case serves as a pivotal moment in framing AI's obligations and using proprietary content as the AI industry continues its exponential growth. Aligning technological advancements with robust IP protections will be key to fostering sustainable innovation. India is just a couple of years behind because they were not a priority yet. But wait till generative AI, wait till tech AI comes in. Let's see what happens in this lawsuit. I expect the lawsuit will be settled and deals will be made. Listen, of course, OpenAI, ChatGPT, they will make a deal with these Indian publishers. And how much will they make? Now, these big billionaires that are operating these papers, they might have caught this a little bit earlier because not all the consumption right now is digitally over in India like it is over here in the States or in Europe and other more, westernized markets. Could be a different story. A couple other things we can bring up here. Super Bowl commercials now are costing up to $8 million for an ad, as we're getting into that right now. CNN right now says that corporate demand has passed even Fox's expensive ambitions. Fox will be carrying Super Bowl 59 coming up. And the network has sold at least 10 of its Super Bowl commercials for up to $8 million each, according to a person with direct knowledge of the matter. Now, they're already hitting $7 million for ads already, but now $8 million they're getting for some of these ads. Some of those ads deals were just done recently, after some expected sponsors sought to give up their ad time slots. So there are some advertisements that were not allowed to go in the Super Bowl for various reasons. State Farm Insurance, due to the California wildfires, they decided to go and step back on their ads. But the one thing was there was demand for these ads to get them. So there was bidding wars, which is why we see ads that are going to be $8 million for a 30-second spot, most likely. A couple things going on with SiriusXM. We always like to follow them as well and what they're doing. Well, a couple of stories have come out of them that is concerning with them. In 2024, they reported a loss of 296,000 subscribers. That's a big chunk. So fourth quarter, full year 2024 operating and financial results. They made $8.7 billion in revenue. They now have a set total of subscribers right now for SiriusXM at 33 million people. Interesting. Total cost of services at SiriusXM was $2.6 billion, a 2% decrease compared to the previous year. And gross profit was almost $4 billion, a decrease of 6% from the previous year. And SiriusXM now has a new satellite, apparently. SiriusXM and Maxar Space Systems announced the XXM-9 satellite has completed in-orbit testing and is now fully operational by SiriusXM after being successfully launched by a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket on December 5th of 2024. XXM-9 will continue to provide reliable delivery of audio entertainment for SiriusXM and information services to consumers in the U.S., Canada, and Puerto Rico. There's also a boatload of different stories that came out that we can talk about as well that are just like quick little headliners just to kind of make mention of. So first off, Bad Bunny and Raul Alejandro, Billboard talking about the story about that they are aiming to revitalize salsa with new albums that have recently come out. And they're infusing traditional rhythms with contemporary elements, trying to attract a younger audience to preserve the rich cultural heritage of salsa music. Thought it was something really cool to go and see that. By the way, SiriusXM also add on there, they are getting layoffs and organizational restructuring being set up because of their fourth quarter report. And they have plans to implement layoffs and a comprehensive restructuring of operations, aiming to streamline the company's focus on satellite core radio services while exploring new growth opportunities. There's a study that came out that social video surpasses traditional TV among viewers, that platforms like YouTube and TikTok have overtaken traditional television as the primary source of video content for younger demographics. And that highlights the changing consumption habits and the increasing importance of digital media and reaching those audiences. Yeah. Trust me, I feel that same pinch because, I might be an older viewer, but still, my consumption habits have definitely gone more online and digital than ever. I have a television in my bedroom. I have not touched it. I've not turned it on maybe in a couple of years. It works, I guess, but I don't touch it. I don't even turn it on. Don't need to. A new report on in-car audio preferences show that listeners favor solo artists over bands, with genres like pop and hip-hop dominating the airwaves. And interesting. Also, if there's still a potential TikTok ban in the U.S. that could happen after the 90-day ban they already have in place, or the 90-day stay right now on the ban that's in place, there's concerns relating about the platform's role in podcast discovery, because data is showing that a significant portion of younger listeners that use TikTok find new podcasts, suggesting a ban could disrupt current podcast marketing strategies. Interesting. I don't know if I get that much out of TikTok for people to go and catch my content. For whatever reason, I'm getting my content suppressed. I used to get a couple hundred views for whatever content I put up there on TikTok. Now it just goes down to nothing. I don't know what's going on over there, but it's what it is. There's not much I could do about it. Honestly, I feel like I just get more traction from YouTube than any other place for whatever reason. Their search algorithm really helps me out because I do try to go ahead and pile it up with a lot of stuff to try to get people to go ahead and follow the content as much as I can. And there was a story earlier this week that talked about where the website may say FM, but it's podcasts that have the most traffic. So there was a story from BRS Media that were ranking the top websites and brands using the .fm top-level domain registry. And usually podcast apps are the ones that do best with a .fm domain. 8 of the top 10 websites. So in this list, you have Anchor.fm, which was Spotify's podcasting platform, which has now been redesigned, or now reconfigured. Cashbox.fm was second. You have Omni.fm, Megaphone.fm, Podscribe.fm, Overcast.fm, Soundcast.fm, Captivate, Riverside, Transistor, Panoply, and Player.fm are among the top of these as well. Oh, Spotify winning a lawsuit over bundling royalties. That also came up. I'm going to bring this up real quick. There was a lawsuit for the Mechanical Licensing Collective that accused the streaming giant of unfairly cutting royalty rates as part of their audiobooks music bundling option. And there was a decision made on Wednesday that the federal royalty rate rules clearly allowed Spotify to legally claim the lower rate. Audiobook streaming, quote, is a product or service that is distinct from music streaming and has more token value. Premium is therefore properly categorized as a bundle. And because of the fact that Spotify has their bundle for audiobooks along with their music and podcasts, will result in the company paying roughly $150 million less over the next year. So how much of a priority are audiobooks to Spotify when that means these authors, these book writers, probably will look more towards Audible to make sure they get royalties off of what they're doing. Very interesting. Brian Roberts, who's chairman and CEO of Comcast, has emphasized in a call with Wall Street analysts that NBCU has a strong vision for operating NBC and Bravo. There's one cable channel, Bravo, that's going to stay with NBC Universal, as the other channels are going to be into a separate company. And some 98% of the viewing of these channels and on the Peacock streamer, is driven by the NBC broadcast mothership and Bravo. Just so you know about that too. So that's where you're seeing streaming's not going to get hurt by all these cable channels being branched off. Interesting. Mike Cavanaugh, president of Comcast, says we're not really running a Peacock-only strategy. We're running a broadcast plus streaming strategy and looking to optimize that over the years ahead. And as for the channels being spun off into a separate entity, they weren't integral to the emphasis we put on Peacock and the streaming feature for NBC broadcast in particular. The assets are going to be better managed and have opportunities in the future that are better optimized for our shareholders by putting them in the hands of a strong leadership team that was already unveiled in this new company that will be spun off. We're going to wrap things up on the program, and I really appreciate all of you listening to the program and finding the shows as you do. And, of course, you might not know this, but you know what? I would love to go and have more help from the listeners out here and supporting the program. So I want to just make a point before wrapping things up of what you could do to help me out on this podcast to help make it possible. So a couple things. Number one, I do have a PayPal link, a Cash App link, and you can also buy me a coffee. All the links are over at kingofpodcasts.com, or you can find in the description on the bottom of this episode in the podcast or on YouTube, and I hope you consider that. So come back next week for another Broadcasters Podcast. Remember, the content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.